"Before we proceed with the signatures," I said, "I need to present something to the mediator." The conference room went quiet. My wife, Sandra, was already leaning back in her chair with that composed expression she'd been wearing for the past 7 months, ever since she told me she wanted out of our 22-year marriage. Her attorney, a sharp woman in a charcoal blazer named Patricia Holt, had a pen extended toward me and a stack of documents fanned across the table. Everything already prepared. Everything already decided. All I had to do was sign. The terms were straightforward, the way a guillotine is straightforward. She would get the house we'd shared since 2006. She would get the car, the joint savings account, and alimony of $3,000 a month. She would get half the appraised value of Briggs Property Services, the landscaping and grounds maintenance company I had spent 31 years building from a single used truck and a box of hand tools. Half of everything I had ever worked for. I was 63 years old. I had calluses on my hands from actual work. I had spent 3 decades hauling equipment before sunrise, managing crews in the rain, chasing invoices, and pouring every dollar back into a business that now employed 11 people. And I was supposed to sit here and sign it away. That's what everyone expected. My own attorney, a decent but tired man named Gerald, who had advised me repeatedly to settle and preserve what dignity I had left. My sister, who told me to just move on. Even my daughter, who I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years, had gone silent in a way that felt like agreement. I was supposed to be a broken old man who had lost the fight. I had let them believe that. I reached into my briefcase and placed a manila folder on the table. Sandra's composure shifted, just slightly. A tightening around the eyes. A fraction of a second where the mask slipped before she pulled it back into place. "What is that?" Patricia Holt asked evenly. "Documentation," I said. "I'd like the mediator to review it before anything is signed." The mediator, a retired judge named Franklin Oates, who had done this kind of work for 15 years and had probably seen everything, took the folder without comment. He opened it. He read the first page. Then the second. He looked up at me once, then back down at the papers. His expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes did. "Mrs. Briggs," he said, his voice measured, "I'd like to take a short recess." Sandra's composed expression cracked at the edges. She looked at Patricia Holt. Patricia Holt looked at the folder. Then she looked at me in a way that told me she hadn't known. Whatever Sandra had kept from me, she had kept from her lawyer, too. "What exactly is in that folder?" Sandra asked. Her voice was controlled, but the steadiness was costing her something. "The truth," I said. "Something you've kept in short supply for a while now. Let me tell you how I got there. My name is Raymond Briggs. I am 63 years old, live in Dayton, Ohio, and I have spent the better part of my adult life building something with my hands. I grew up without much. My father worked the line at a parts plant, and my mother cleaned offices on weekends. What I inherited from them wasn't money. It was the understanding that if you wanted something to last, you built it yourself. I started Briggs Property Services when I was 32. 1 truck, a push mower, and a handshake agreement with a property management company that needed their parking lots kept clean year-round. Within 5 years, I had 4 employees and a contract with 2 commercial strip malls. Within 10 years, I had 11 employees, a fleet of 3 vehicles, a warehouse unit on the edge of town, and a client list that included municipal parks, corporate campuses, and private estates across 3 counties. I was not wealthy, by any grand measure, but I had built something real. My first marriage ended when my daughter was 3 years old. That's a story for another time. What matters is that I raised her. Alone for 7 years, then with Sandra. I met Sandra when my daughter was 10. She was warm and patient and laughed at the right moments and seemed genuinely interested in being a family. I was cautious. The way you are after one marriage has already come apart. But Sandra was persistent. She said she loved my daughter like her own. She said she wanted to be part of what I was building. By the time my daughter was 12, we were married. For years, things seemed fine. Sandra helped with the business bookkeeping in the early days. before we had a dedicated accountant. My daughter grew up, went off to college in Columbus, started her own life. We were distant the way adult children and their parents sometimes are. I told myself it was normal. She was busy. I was busy. Distance didn't mean anything was wrong, except something was wrong. I could feel it in the quality of our conversations when they happened, shorter every year, a flatness in her voice that I couldn't explain. When she stopped coming home for the holidays, Sandra told me she was probably just establishing her independence. When she stopped calling on my birthday, Sandra said young people these days aren't as attentive. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. The friend who eventually told me the truth was my accountant, a man named Dale who had handled Briggs Property Services books for 8 years. Dale was old school, careful, the kind of man who kept physical ledgers as backup even in the digital age. He came to me in October, 8 months after Sandra had told me she wanted a divorce, and he sat across from my desk with an expression I can only describe as someone who is about to ruin your evening and knows it. "Ray," he said, "I've been doing this job a long time. I want you to understand that what I'm about to show you I wish I'd caught earlier." He laid a printout on my desk, then another, then a third. "Who has access to the company accounts?" he asked. I told him. Me, obviously. Dale and Sandra, who still had view access from the early years that I had never thought to revoke. Dale nodded slowly. Then he walked me through what he'd found. Not large withdrawals, nothing that would trigger an automatic flag. Small transfers, recurring, over a period of 4 years. An equipment vendor payment that went to an account that wasn't our vendor. A maintenance expense that went somewhere else. A dozen small redirections that added up, over 48 months, to a little over $60,000. I stared at the printouts for a long time. "Where did it go?" I asked. "A personal account," Dale said. "I can give you the routing trail, but I can't tell you whose account it was." I hired a private investigator named Barbara Metz, a former insurance fraud examiner who now ran a one-woman operation out of an office near the university. She was 60 herself, efficient, and not prone to softening hard news. It took her 6 weeks. When she came back to me, she had a folder of her own. The account receiving the transfers belonged to a man named Gary Cresswell. Gary Cresswell was 55 years old. He owned a small property rental operation in Kettering. He was also, according to phone records, credit card receipts, and 2 sets of hotel invoices that Barbara played. I sat with that for a moment. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. 3 years, I said. "At minimum," Barbara said. "The financial transfers go back 4 years, so it may be longer." I had met Gary Cresswell. He had been to my house. He had sat at my table. He and Sandra knew each other through a neighborhood association she had joined a few years back and I had never paid much attention to. I had shaken his hand. "Is there anything else?" I asked. Barbara hesitated. "In my experience, when an investigator hesitates, there is always something else. This is the part I want you to hear carefully," she said. She pulled out another set of pages. I was doing a general background on Cresswell and looking at his digital footprint. In the course of that, I found email correspondence. Some of it involved your wife. Some of it involved your daughter. I looked up. Barbara set the pages on the table slowly. "These are emails forwarded from an account your wife controlled. An email address she created, apparently, to intercept messages. Let me tell you what I learned. My daughter had been reaching out to me for years. Not through the silence I had interpreted as distance and independence and the natural drift of adult children. She had been writing emails, sending messages, reaching out through social media channels I rarely used. She had been trying to tell me about milestones in her life, asking why I seemed cold whenever she called, wondering why I never responded to things she had sent. Sandra had created a mirror email account, close enough to mine that autocomplete would route messages there. She had been intercepting my daughter's outreach for years, responding sometimes in a way that mimicked my voice well enough that my daughter received silence and deflection where she expected her father. My daughter had spent years believing I had checked out of her life. That I was too busy, or too indifferent, or had simply chosen Sandra's version of our household over her. She had stopped trying because she thought I had stopped caring. I sat at my kitchen table long after Barbara left that evening. The folder was in front of me. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the dark. 22 years. A woman I had trusted with my home, my finances, my daughter. She had not only stolen money from my company and carried on a relationship with another man, she had spent years quietly severing the one bond I valued above everything else. I did not sleep that night. I thought about calling my daughter. I picked up the phone twice and put it down. What was I going to say? I didn't even know if she would answer. I had no idea what she thought of me now, what she had concluded from years of my apparent silence. I decided to wait, not because I didn't want to reach out, but because I knew there was one moment coming, one place and one time where the truth had to come out completely and in a way that couldn't be dismissed or managed. I needed the right moment. That moment was the mediation. Franklin Oates returned from the recess after 45 minutes. Patricia Holt had spoken privately with Sandra. When they came back into the room, Sandra looked like a different person. The composed woman who had walked in with a plan to extract everything from a man she assumed was already defeated had been replaced by someone who looked like she was calculating how much damage was still containable. "Mr. Briggs," Oates said, "the documentation you've provided raises significant concerns about the proposed settlement terms. I'd like to hear from you directly about what you're seeking." I had rehearsed this. I had thought about it for weeks. What I would say, how I would say it, how much I wanted to dismantle Sandra in front of her attorney. Standing there, looking at her, I found that what I had rehearsed didn't quite fit what I was feeling. "The financial fraud," I said. "The transfers to an outside account over 4 years, totaling $60,000. Those came from my company. My employees depend on that company. That money needs to be accounted for." Patricia Holt was very still. "The proposed settlement," I continued, "includes my wife receiving half the appraised value of that company. I am asking that the settlement be set aside and restructured to reflect that she has been drawing down company funds for years and that any assets she is entitled to be calculated after that debt is addressed." "That's one matter," Oates said carefully. "Is there another?" I looked at Sandra. She was looking at the table. "My daughter," I said. "I'd like that addressed too." She looked up. "My wife intercepted communications between me and my daughter for years using a fraudulent email account. My daughter believes I chose distance, that I stopped being her father in any meaningful way. I want it on record that those communications were intercepted and that I intend to correct that record with my daughter directly. I don't need the mediator's help for that part. I just want it documented that it happened." The silence that followed was long. "Is this true?" Oates asked Sandra directly. Sandra's attorney put a hand on her arm. Sandra shook it off slightly. "I was protecting our marriage," Sandra said. Her voice was quiet. "Protecting it from what?" I asked. She didn't answer. "From my daughter reaching out to her own father? She was always pulling you away. Every time she called, you got distant. Every time she visited, you were somewhere else in your head. Because you told me she was pulling away," I said. "You told me she needed space. You spent years telling me that she was independent and didn't need as much connection and that I should give her room. And the whole time you were making sure she never actually reached me. The mask came completely off then, not in a dramatic way, more like watching something crumble slowly." Sandra pressed her lips together and looked at a spot on the table and didn't say anything for a while. "What are you asking for?" she finally said. "Not to the mediator. To me. I'm asking for a fair accounting," I said. "Not what you drew up with your lawyer in a room I wasn't in. Not a settlement designed around the assumption that I was too worn down to look closely. A fair accounting. What the house is worth, what the company is worth after the stolen funds are deducted, and split honestly. And the money Gary received will be a matter between you, him, and potentially the district attorney's office. That's not something I'm choosing. That's a consequence you created." Patricia Holt leaned toward her client and said something quiet. Sandra nodded once. "I'd like to propose," Patricia Holt said to Oates, That we recess and reschedule. That's reasonable, Oates said. I sat in my truck in the parking garage afterward for a while, not as long as I'd expected. An hour, maybe. The December cold had gotten into the concrete, and my breath fogged the windshield. I was 63 years old, and I had just watched 22 years of what I had believed was my life come apart in a conference room. But I kept thinking about my daughter. I drove home, I made coffee, I sat at the kitchen table where Barbara Metz had laid out the evidence 2 months earlier, and I opened my laptop. I drafted an email. I deleted it. I wrote another one. I deleted that one too. After the fourth draft, I picked up the phone and called her number. The one I had for her that I now understood she had been calling me from without response for years. It rang twice. Dad? Her voice was careful, uncertain, the voice of someone who had been disappointed enough times to be cautious about expecting something good. Hey, sweetheart, I said. There was a pause. Is everything okay? No, I said. But I need to tell you something and I don't know how to do it on the phone. Can I come see you? Another pause. Longer. Yeah, she said. Okay. I drove to Columbus the following Saturday. She lived in a small house on the east side, a rental she'd been in for 3 years. I brought nothing except the truth, which is the only thing worth bringing to a conversation like that. She opened the door and for a moment we just looked at each other. She was 31 years old. The last time I'd seen her had been 2 years ago, a brief and stiff holiday dinner where we had made small talk about her job and the weather, and I had driven home feeling like I had visited a stranger. I had blamed myself for that, told myself I must have done something wrong somewhere along the way, some failure of fatherhood I couldn't identify. She looked like me around the eyes. She always had. Come in, she said. We sat in her small kitchen. She had made coffee without asking whether I wanted any, which meant some things hadn't changed. I told her everything. Not quickly, not smoothly. I stumbled over parts of it. My voice got thick when I talked about the emails, about the years of her reaching out and hitting what she must have experienced as a wall of indifference. She was very quiet for a long time. She responded to some of them, she finally said. I thought it was you. I know. She told me you were swamped with work, that you were glad I was doing well. That kind of answer. She looked out the window. I kept thinking, that doesn't sound like my dad. But then I thought, maybe I don't know you as well as I thought I did. I never stopped thinking about you, I said. Every birthday, every holiday. I thought you were living your life and didn't need your old man underfoot. Her jaw tightened. She told me you were fine with the distance. She told me the same about you. We sat with that for a while. The coffee got cold. Neither of us reached for it. Dad. Her voice was tight now. I sent you a message when I got my promotion at work, a big one. I was so proud. You sent back 3 words. Good for you. I closed my eyes. That wasn't me. I know that now. She got up and went to a cabinet near the window and came back with a small box, the kind people use to keep documents or keepsakes. She set it on the table. I kept them. I don't know why. The ones that felt wrong. I printed them out and kept them because something about them bothered me and I didn't want to forget. She opened the box. I looked at the printed emails. My name in the sender line. Words I would never have written. Responses calibrated to sound just plausible enough to pass, but cold where I was warm, distant where I would have been specific. I looked at those pages for a long time. I missed everything, I said. We both did, she said. She sat back down across from me. She was crying quietly. I was not far from it myself. What happens now? She asked. Now we figure out how to make up for lost time, if you want to. She looked at me for a long moment, the same careful look she'd had when she answered the phone, still deciding whether it was safe to hope. I want to, she said. I cried in my truck after I left her house. I'm 63 years old and I am not ashamed of that. Some things earn tears, and there's no dignity in refusing them. The divorce was finalized 5 months later. The restructured settlement was significantly different from what Sandra had originally drawn up. The fraudulent transfers were documented and deducted from her share. The house sold and the equity split fairly. The business remained mine. The matter of the financial fraud was referred to the county prosecutor's office. Sandra and Gary Cresswell both received civil judgments. Whether criminal charges followed, I leave to the legal system to sort. She lost most of her social circle when word got around, the way it does in a city Dayton size. I can't say I felt nothing about that, but I felt less than I expected. Mostly I felt tired of the whole machinery of betrayal and its aftermath. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes after a long fight that has nothing to do with the winning. I moved into a smaller house on the north side, 2 bedrooms, a yard I could manage myself on weekends. The first weekend my daughter came to visit, we sat on the back porch for 4 hours and talked about everything we had missed. Her work, her life, a man she was seeing who she seemed genuinely happy with. She talked about her childhood in a way that was honest, including the parts that had been hard. I listened. I did not make excuses. "You worked a lot," she said. "I remember that." "I did," I said. "I thought I was building something for us." "You did build something. I just wanted to be there more while you were building it." That's the kind of truth that costs something to hear. I let it cost what it cost. She has a key to my house now. She uses it. She shows up sometimes on Saturday mornings with coffee and no particular agenda, and we sit in the kitchen the way people sit when they're no longer making up for lost time and are just simply in each other's lives. It is ordinary, and it is everything. My business is doing well. I promoted Dale to a more formal financial oversight role and brought in new accounting software that flags irregular transfers automatically. 11 employees who have families and bills and lives that depend on what I built. I do not take that lightly. My brother called me after the settlement, something he hadn't done in years, and said he was proud of me for not rolling over. I told him I had just told the truth. He said that was the same thing. I think about Sandra sometimes. Not often. Not with the anger I expected to carry. Just occasionally, the way you think about any long chapter that has ended. 22 years of mornings and holidays and ordinary evenings that were built on something false without my knowing it. I grieve what I thought it was, not what it turned out to be. There is a difference. I am 63 years old. I am not starting over, because starting over implies the past counts for nothing. I am continuing. Differently, with better information. There is one thing I want to say to anyone watching this who recognizes something of their own story in mine. The loneliness of believing someone you love has simply stopped caring about you is one of the most specific and exhausting kinds of grief. If you have felt that loneliness, whether with a parent, a child, a friend, I want you to consider the possibility that the silence you have been hearing was not the whole story. Ask the question, make the call, knock on the door. I almost didn't. I almost told myself my daughter had moved on, and that I should respect her life as she had built it without me. I almost drove past the truth on my way to a smaller, lonelier version of my own life. I am glad I knocked. The other thing I want to say is this. Sandra counted on me being too tired to look closely. She counted on my assumption that things were more or less as they appeared. People who deceive you for years rely on your trust, your good faith, your willingness to believe the best. That is not a flaw in you. Trusting the people you love is not a mistake. The mistake was theirs. Being deceived does not make you a fool. It makes you human. The person who should carry the weight of it is the one who lied, not the one who believed. I built a business with my hands over 31 years. I have 11 people on my payroll who go home to their families every night because that business holds. I have a daughter who calls me on Tuesday evenings for no particular reason except to talk. I have a small house with a back porch and a yard I tend on Saturdays and a life that is genuinely mine. Sandra tried to take the money, the house, and the story. She walked away with a fraction of the first, none of the second, and a very different version of the third than she had planned. What she didn't take, because she never understood it was there, was the most important thing. My daughter at my kitchen table, the sound of her key in my front door, The ordinary fact of being known by someone who has chosen to know you, that's what I built. That's what I kept. If you watched all the way through, thank you for being here. Subscribe if you want more stories about regular people who refuse to stay down. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's not too late. And if you're sitting somewhere right now thinking about a call you've been putting off, consider making it. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. Today's still here.